Welcome to the first part of the tutorial about applied metrology for novel human-computer interaction. So, in this tutorial, we will see how applied metrology is useful in characterizing the instrumentation that we use for these novel interfaces, and also how it allows us to highlight the bottlenecks to performance. As we all know, computers in the last years, have been evolving a lot. Of course, we started from some devices that were the size of a room, and it seems like a long time ago, but actually it was quite near to us, near to our ears. But soon this kind of devices evolved to personal computers, and so to some kind of portable computers too, and today to handheld devices and tablets and smartphones and so on. So everybody today has a smartphone, has a computing device in his pocket or inner pocket. Now we are facing as technological and scientific research novel interfaces. And again, something that yesterday looked like science fiction, because if you see this part of the movie of Iron Man 2, we had years ago this idea of interacting with the virtual objects with some kind of holograms. And as new ways to understand the problem and to reflect on them, few years later, in 2016 already, an equipe of surgeons were studying the tissues and all the organs of a patient before starting the surgical operation. And in this sense, you can see that thanks to the virtual reality devices, actually this was a mixed reality as we will understand, they were capable of studying these virtual objects like exactly in the science fiction, just few years before that. So, what we can say today is that we have a broad term that is called extended reality that involves different kinds of technologies. First of all, we have the augmented reality, in which we have overlaid information of the real world. So, in this sense, the world is augmented because we have this kind of textual information that we can have in addition to the real world, and the world with the senses that we naturally have is augmented by this digital information. But also the mixed reality, of which we saw an example, is a case in which the virtual objects are potentially indistinguishable from the real objects, and in this sense they are mixed, they are fused somehow. We have also the virtual reality, as maybe somebody already knows, with also gaming and other scenarios in which we are completely immersed in a new reality, in a virtual reality. And these three broad categories, with all the nuances between them, fall under the umbrella term of extended reality. In a broader sense, these are cyber-physical systems. So these are computer systems that allow us to interact continuously with the physical world. And in general, in a cyber-physical interface is something that allows the man to be completely integrated and to provide an integrated collaboration with the machines and with the tools that we have, that we can use in the industrial scenarios or in the healthcare scenarios and so on. And speaking of cyber-physical systems, we have brain-computer interfaces. These new interfaces are sometimes called also the ultimate way we can interact with the world, because they rely directly on the measurement of brain signals, and sometimes in an extended version also the nerves and the peripheral part of the nervous system. And with this kind of activity that we measure, we are able to communicate and control with the real world. And in this sense, these are the most advanced up to date cyber-physical interfaces that are still objects of research, both from the scientific and technological point of view. These kind of interfaces allow one to interact with our muscles and nerves that are naturally provided. So, of course, these were first taught for people with health diseases, with motor impairments, with other severe impairments. But we can see also these as assistive tools for other cases like industrial scenarios, but also for gaming, entertainment, and leisure. So not necessarily for people with impairments. A brain-computer interface can be seen as a metrological chain, and in particular, all started in this loop from the signal acquisition of some brain signals. So we acquire usually the activity that could be an electrical activity, a magnetic activity, or other kinds of activity from the brain, and these acquired signals are processed. Now, in a simple way, we can distinguish this process into steps. The first step is a feature extraction step, and the second one is a feature translation step. In this kind, we are like synthesizing the signals into some features that are representative, and then we associate these features with a meaning, and this meaning allows us to control or to communicate with a BCI application. And the BCI application gives a feedback to the user, which is a feedback in terms of sensory feedback, could be a visual one, an auditor one, an haptic one, for example. And this naturally closes the loop to have a feedback, so to have the result of the action that is in this case actually is not a direct action, but is an imagined action or a voluntary population of brain signals or something that can be generated elsewhere. And speaking of that, we could also have actually the metrological chain starting from the BCI application. Because in this case, we can have an application that provides sensory stimulation, not any more feedback, not just necessarily feedback. So the sensory stimulation evokes some potentials that we measure and then we process, and then these are able to give us communication and control capabilities with the system. So this kind of concept was already brought to the attention of the scientific community years ago in 2012 with this first simple idea in some sense, but in some other sense also a breakthrough idea, because in this paper, the authors said that BCI could be used for a Superman-like X-ray vision. In this kind of experiment, they were providing a surgeon which was already wearing an helmet for mixed reality, for augmented reality, and on this kind of helmet, on this kind of visor, he or she had the computer tomography images of the patient. But during the surgical operation, the idea was that the surgeon did not want to have all the time the images superimposed, and the idea was to use the BCI for a just on-off feature, just to enable and disable the visualization of this kind of images. In this sense, the surgeon was like Superman that could activate the X-ray vision, but not always when he or she wanted. In another concept of this kind of interfaces, we see here an impaired woman, and this impaired woman is able to feed herself by controlling voluntarily a robotic arm that moves this kind of drink to her. But also this can be used not only in prosthesis, but also in the rehabilitation. And in this case, again, we have a motor rehabilitation or stroke rehabilitation in which the user, thinking voluntarily of activating the muscles of a hand that is impaired and maybe is not able to move directly, activates an electrical stimulation of the nerve that then actually moves the hand or the arm. And in the meantime, in this kind of experiment, he also had a virtual reality scenario in which there were virtual hands shown as a reinforcement of the feedback, in this case a visual feedback, other than the proprioceptive feedback of the movement of the arm. And finally, we came to non-healthcare related applications. In this case, for gaming, at least these are not necessarily related to that because they could be seen as a neural training, either for impaired or non-impaired people, for example, for athletes. And in this case, you see that we have a kind of game which recalls a common game that we know and we use on our smartphones, but the difference is that it is used with the brain-computer interfaces, and so the avatar is controlled by means of brain waves. And in this case, it was a spontaneous brainwave that was voluntarily modulated, called motor range. So to recap, the metrological chain of a BCI sees these kind of steps of acquisition and processing, but it can help to restore, to improve, to enhance the abilities to make research, and to substitute also something that is lost as kind of functioning in a process. Now, in this scenario, which as you see already involves measurement, we can also distinguish three types of brain-computer interfaces. The first type is a reactive one, and is the one that we mentioned when we said that there could be a sensory stimulation starting the chain. And in this kind of sensory stimulation, what we measure is the result to the exposition and possibly the voluntary exposition of the user to this stimulus that could be, for example, a visual one. In an active brain-computer interface, instead, the measurement is a spontaneous activity. But this spontaneous activity is voluntarily modulated, and it could be, for example, the idea of motor images in which you imagine a movement without doing it, but this imagination of the movement makes a modulation of the brain waves that you can use to control or communicate. And finally, we have passive brain-computer interfaces in which, again, the activity that we measure is a spontaneous one, but this is not voluntarily modulated. And it could be, for example, the monitoring of emotions or the attention during some tasks. If you use this information to communicate or control, this is a brain-computer interface. What if we want to bring this technology closer to daily life? Of course, we would like to require some light, wearable, and efficient system that passes through light, wearable, and efficient instrumentation. But usually we find something like this, in which we have many electrodes, we have many cables, and we need that because we need to acquire as much information as possible from different parts of the scalp. But of course, again, inspired by science fiction, we would like something like that, in which the armament just has few electrodes that are non-invasive, that are wearable, that are portable in the sense that the user can move with it and so on. But still, while having these kind of constraints, we want to achieve high performance. So the constraint usually is that if we want wearability, we have to reduce the number of electrodes that we use. So we are naturally reducing the number of information, the amount of information that we have about brain activity. But still, we want to achieve this high performance, and in this sense, we can use, of course, advanced artificial intelligence techniques to process this kind of signals, but we need to pay attention, and applied metrology recalls us on that we have to probably measure the brain signals, measured from the point of view of acquisition and processing, also processing in real time, and we have also to characterize the instrumentation to understand the errors and the uncertainties that can arise from it, especially if we are using wearable and portable off-the-shelf instrumentation. To better understand this kind of concept, let's go also to a case study. That is the case study of steady-state visual evoked potentials, or in brief, SSVEP. In this kind of paradigm, this is a reactive paradigm, as you will understand. There is a flickering light, and the user exposes to this flickering light, generating in the occipital part of the brain a wave that has the same frequency of the flickering. So the idea is that if we have multiple flickering icons and different frequencies, we can measure this frequency arising in the occipital part of the brain, summing somehow to the rest of the activity that already was ongoing, and we can understand what the user was looking at. This is a well-known paradigm studied since many years. A first contribution that as metrologists we could do in the last years was to develop a wearable SSVP-based brain-computer interface by using smart glasses. In this case, these were wearable glasses just to provide the flickering lights at a controlled also distance from the eye. In the middle, the user is a kind of transducer that transduces the incoming light and generates electrical signals in the occipital part of the brain particularly. And then we have a wearable device, an off-the-shelf device, which was also a bot that is capable of acquiring this activity and bringing it back to the microcontroller of the smart glasses to close the loop for processing and for control. In this case, the control was to activate the icon. So we did this kind of system, we prototyped it, we experimented it on 20 subjects, and after that we also went deeper into the measurement, because we said, okay, what we can do is a simple way, at least as a first approach, was to use a Fourier transform and consider the amplitude spectra of the occipital brain signal, and calculated the power spectral densities around the frequencies of interest. So by understanding if there was a certain power spectral density around the 10 Hz harmonic or the 12 Hz harmonic, we could understand what the user was looking at. So far so good. This was a way to study the signal, to classify and to have a features translation. We also noticed that there were higher order harmonics or order than the main one, but from the functional point of view, it worked and it was done. From the understanding of the instrumentation, instead, there was this kind of question, because we were stimulating the user with a square wave. And we would expect from that only the odd harmonics with a certain low scaling of the amplitudes. But we are obtaining also even harmonics and with a different scaling low. And the literature so far was saying, okay, this is fair enough, because we have a nonlinear effect of the user brain, and this translates the incoming light, which maybe was a square wave, into something else that is not a square wave component. But we were triggered by this kind of result, and we wanted to understand it more because we were also wondering that our instrumentation that was wearable, portable, and low cost could introduce errors and uncertainties that were significant. So, in the second part of the tutorial, what we will see is how we characterize the metrological chain, and we will have an idea of how we could use the methods of applied metrology to understand that there was actually bottlenecks. There were bottlenecks that were not related exclusively to the user, and this unexpected behavior, this unexpected harmonics could be explained in a different way. In the meanwhile, I thank you for your attention, and I thank all the partners that through these years have been working on this kind of activities with us in applied metrology. Thank you.